All right. Thanks for coming, everyone, especially after 2.5 or like close to 3 days of full conference already. I'll be talking about consumer-driven software development, or what I call consumer-driven software development. And this is the first time I'm talking about this, and if you have any feedback, feel free to come after the talk and share it with me. If it's positive feedback, you can also share with others. Other feedback, maybe just with me. Right, so my name is Aiko. This is me being silly with 2 colleagues from the office in Bangalore. I work for a company called ThoughtWorks. And a quick show of hands, who has heard of ThoughtWorks? Okay, that's, maybe you went to Neil's talk yesterday. So ThoughtWorks is a consultancy. That means we build individual software, custom software for different clients in different domains, and we use different technologies, different languages, different tech stacks, basically whatever the client needs. And we do that in a way that we apply what we think are the best practices in software development, be it continuous integration or continuous delivery, or test-driven development, what we have seen before, at least kind of. Another thing is pair programming that we also do. So we apply all of these. And over the last, working for a consultancy kind of makes me a consultant. But I mean, I write code, right? So I think myself I see myself as a developer. But working for a consultancy had a couple of advantages, and I noticed that over the last couple of years because I worked on multiple projects, and I worked on multiple teams, and I worked with like a lot of different people, and especially when it comes to pair programming, I was pairing with a lot of different people. And at some point, I realized that there is a certain pattern that I follow. And this pattern, this pattern is what I call consumer-driven software development, and that helped me make reasonable decisions a little bit easier. Right, and so the question is, like, consumer-driven software development, why do we need that? Because software development is difficult. Like, it's really complicated, and that's, that's one reason why we earn the amount of money we earn. But there's a lot of thought that goes into it. When we think about, and we think a lot, like we think about how do we name this variable? We think about how do we name this function? What do I need to put in the commit message for it to be reasonable? Does this function actually belong to this class, or should it go somewhere else? What is the correct algorithmic approach here for the problem that I try to solve? And all of this makes software development in general really difficult. Like, we need a lot of thinking. It's mentally exhausting, and I'm sure if you have worked 8, 10, 12 hours a day, you would agree that it's exhausting. And there are a couple of methodologies that help, and extreme programming is one of them that already give us some methods on like how to cope with this how complicated it is and how difficult it is. And for example, extreme programming gives us, just like the previous speaker also, shows us that doing small steps and getting fast feedback is valuable. Part of extreme programming is continuous integration. Another part is pair programming, or in this case, maybe air programming. Okay, that joke wasn't as good, I guess. So there are a couple of things that extreme programming and there are other methodologies already give us to make our life as software developers easier. But it's still difficult. And there's this quote that most of you have probably seen, and there are only 2 hard things in computer science: cache invalidation and naming things. And some funny people add off by 1 errors to that quote. The point is that the naming things is one of the things that I mentioned earlier, like the test name or the variable namings, the function name, all of these things. And this quote is 35 years old now, and I think it still applies. So it's still like the naming things is still a very, very difficult thing. Right. And I have to ask you a question. What do you think is the most important language in programming? JavaScript. Who said English? Very true. That is exactly. I was hoping that lots of people say Java and C as the mother of language and JavaScript and Python. What? English. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The language that you speak and write in. That is the most important language in programming. How you communicate with your other developers who read your code later, or even with yourself when you read your code later, is, in my understanding, significantly more important than whether you do JavaScript or Java. I mean, you need those languages, but in terms of communication, English in that case is the key. And that's basically, so basically if you, like 5 minutes into the talk, this is what I think consumer-driven software development is about. Like all these things that you think about, like the variable naming, the function naming, what do you put in the commit message? All these, every time you think about something, that creates a product. I mean, obviously you build a software product, right? You build an artifact, whether it be some kind of app or some kind of website. But all these small things also build a product, and someone is consuming it. And the question you want to ask yourself is, who's that consumer? And in many cases, it's a common developer like you or your colleagues. It can be other people. But the question is, who is the consumer of these products that you create with your thoughts, and what do they need to know? And that gives you a hint, or that gives you an idea of how to approach these problems that we are talking about, especially in terms of naming things. Does that make sense so far? Oh, kinda. So there is everyone knows what this is, right? Like a user, who works with user stories here? Everyone? Not that many, actually. So this is a user story. Basically, a developer gets this and then writes code to fulfill whatever is on here. And this is already consumer-driven software development without even knowing it. Like the whole concept of a user story is, as a user of some sort, I want something so that I can get some benefit, right? Like the whole point of view here is already the consumer. Like, hey, I'm the consumer of whatever you build, and I want this so that I can reach that point. And that is, we're already applying what I call consumer-driven software development in our daily life and for ages. But the clue here is it's not just consumer-driven software development. It's some kind of transitive consumer-driven software development, because the developer who plays this story gets the perspective from the consumer, right? So that is like the consumer is driving the development. But the actual cool thing is, and that's why I think it's transitive, the developer isn't the person who wrote this user story. Someone else wrote the user story, whether it be the business analyst or the product owner or whoever writes your user stories. And that means that person who wrote the user story got the perspective from you as the consumer, you as the developer, as the consumer of that user story, and figured out, okay, the perspective that you as the consumer need is the perspective from the user. So it's like a transitive consumer relationship where two people actually get the perspective from consumers, and different consumers in this case. So this is one example where I think we should apply consumer-driven software development, but I see too many cases where we don't. And I can tell you a story where, or an example that you probably have had yourself, you have this, you have to add this new feature, or you want to add this new feature, and you know there's a function somewhere in some class that does something similar, and you just need to extend it, right? So you want to add some functionality to that function, and you go to that class where you think the function is, but the function isn't there anymore. So you ask yourself, where's that function gone? I need to add some lines of code there. And you look at the commit message, right? And the commit message says, move function to different class. Well, this is, and you say, what the fuck? Where did you move it? And why did you move it? And this is an example. I mean, obviously this, I made that today, but situations like this have happened. And this is an obvious case where the writer of the commit message did not think about who is the consumer of that commit message and what does the consumer need to know. And in fact, I can think of two examples, and I'm talking about consumers here because they are, I can imagine two roles actually needing that information. One is the situation I explained where you have the code changes. You know the code changes. You don't need to know what changed. You need to know why it changed, right? You need to know why did it move somewhere else. Can I just get it back? And if you know the reason, you can actually make a more educated decision on how you will continue. And the other situation is where you just need to find a commit message in a long list of commit messages. And you know, I need that commit message where this happened. And that means you need to have the information in the commit message of what changed. So that leads us basically to the point, and this is what I always beg my colleagues to do, put in the commit message what you did, but also put why you did it, so that I can actually understand why that was necessary, and maybe I don't just throw out your code again the next time when I change something. And there's another example, that is a real life example. I mean, this is not real, but it happened exemplary, where the test failed, and the message I got was, this is the test that failed. User controller should return 200. That doesn't, I mean, it tells me, okay, this test failed, and it expected a 200 of some sort, but it didn't tell me in what context did it expect a 200. I have 5 tests that expected 200, because my controller returns 200 for different things, right? Different valid inputs. And that's the thing that I also, where I also, as a consumer, when I get this error message, I need to know what is the condition that led to, or what is the condition that the test tests that leads to the output that the test expects. And there's, we already do that. Obviously the consumer is the developer again, which can be yourself. There are 2 times where this consumer actually needs to know things when this test name shows up, and this is when the test fails, which I just explored, and when I'm just casually reading the code normally. In order to, there's this gherkin language, this given when then, which you probably know from behavioral-driven development, which I think is a really helpful tool to apply even to unit tests, because if my test would have been when positive value added, then increase balance, I know, okay, there was a positive value, the test is exactly, the state is my deposit thing, I add a positive value and I expect an increased balance, already gives me, okay, this is exactly the bounded context where the test is valid, and not just something happens and then 200. Who here speaks Python? Okay, not too many. So Python has, just in Java, where you override your toString method to give a class or an object a way to represent itself in text, Python has 2 of those. One of them is the dunder str, or the double underscore is called Danda in Python and Danda wrapper. And they represent, it's basically two string methods. And the reason for that is because they are potentially two different consumers of a toString, where the customer gets the nice toString, and you can see that on the bottom where the code screenshot, where if I have my wallet and I just want to string it, I want to see what's in there, right? Like $12.50. However, as a developer, I also want to know, I don't just want a string that says $12.50, because there could be a wallet object, or it could be a dollar object, could be whatever. I want something that is unambiguous and shows exactly the exact representation of the object. And in that case, you can literally, and that's what wrapper is for in Python, you can literally, if you have like most of the implementations, you can literally just copy-paste the string that the wrapper function gives you and can execute it. So this is like the wrapper output is a valid constructor call. Right. Okie dokie. I thought this talk would be 15 minutes, not 25, and I don't have a question and answer slide. But I think my point of this whole, and there was no crazy magic thing, right? I know none of this was genius. It's just a thing that I noticed over the last couple of years, that if I ended up in lots of conversations with, especially when pairing with a colleague, there were lots of discussions about, hey, we should do this, or we should call it this, or we should call it this. And we were discussing for, I don't like to admit that, but we were discussing for like 10, 15, sometimes for 20 minutes, just how to name this one variable. And having this mindset of, okay, who is the actual consumer, who's the actual reader of all of that, and then come from that direction, actually helped me a lot in the last couple of years to come up with reasonable namings. And there are already a lot of examples where we already do that. Right, that's basically it. Thank you very much. And I think we do have at least the option for questions. Other than that, I'll be available for Pivo somewhere. Isn't there? So I think, in terms of method names, I'm a big fan of long method names. I'm a big fan of descriptive method names. We don't have terminals with like 80 characters anymore. We have like widescreen monitors. Everything is HD. I'm totally happy with like really long names, as long as it is descriptive and it describes exactly what's going on. And in terms of commit messages, I think there is this 72 character, not limit, but guideline that you have a maximum 72 characters in your subject. I think that's what the Linux community is following. But you have a whole body of text where you can put lots of stuff in it. And if you run the right git command, you get all the commit message bodies. All right. Any other questions from people? Thanks.